June the 29th, 2017, Beverly Road, Hull. A tense neighborhood street, familiar to many, hid a fatal confrontation waiting to erupt. A woman in a black top stepped outside her home, gripping a kitchen knife. A neighbor stood opposite, armed with a scaffolding pole, moments away from tragedy. Angela Burkitt, once seen simply as a recovering addict trying to rebuild a stable life, was now at the center of a deadly street dispute with her neighbor, Joanne Hemingway. How could a long-standing feud between two women spiral into a single act that ended a life? This was not a sudden explosion of temper, but a revenge-driven confrontation, ignited after Burkitt had been overpowered earlier that day, while Hemingway stepped forward, unaware of how quickly the final clash would unfold. Burkitt delivered one stab wound with such force that the blade snapped inside the victim's chest, and her later attempt to shift blame only deepened the darkness of the case. Inside East Yorkshire's most notorious women, full list of female criminals and life sentences. Welcome to UK Real Crime, where Hull's streets whisper long-buried secrets and the county's most dangerous women are finally unmasked. Today, we look inside East Yorkshire's most shocking cases, uncovering the violent confrontations, fatal decisions, and life sentences that shaped criminal history across the region. What you're about to hear may linger far longer than you expect. First offender, Angela Burkitt, 52 years old. June the 29th, 2017, Beverly Road, Hull. Neighborly tension can simmer quietly for years, but sometimes a single confrontation can turn long-standing hostility into irreversible tragedy. Angela Burkitt, then 52 years old, lived a few doors away from her neighbor, 39-year-old Joanne Hemingway. Their relationship had been defined by years of arguments, hostility, and what witnesses described as a long history of bad blood. Burkitt was a bully, a recovering addict trying to rebuild stability. On the morning of the killing, the tension between the two women flared into a fight witnessed by local residents. Hemingway physically overpowered Burkitt during that altercation. Burkitt viewed this humiliation as a trigger, fueling a desire for revenge. Later that day, the confrontation resumed. Burkitt armed herself with a kitchen knife and stepped outside. Her partner, Glenn Foster, accompanied her carrying a baseball bat and another large knife. Hemingway emerged holding a scaffolding pole. What followed was a brief but fatal street encounter between the neighbors. During the clash, Burkitt stabbed Hemingway once in the chest. The blow was delivered with enough force for the blade to snap off inside the victim's body. Initially, Hemingway appeared unaware of how serious the injury was. She went back into her home, but soon collapsed. Emergency services were called, and she was taken to hospital, where she died at 9:06 in the evening. The police investigation began immediately. Foster was initially arrested and charged, but evidence soon pointed elsewhere. When Foster wrote to Burkitt, urging her to tell the truth, she replied with a dismissive remark. Prosecutors also uncovered attempts to intimidate witnesses and efforts to frame Foster for the killing. Burkitt was formally arrested on August 9, 2017. Burkitt denied responsibility, claiming she had acted in self-defense or that her partner had inflicted the fatal wound. However, CCTV footage and witness testimony placed the knife directly in her hand. The jury at Hull Crown Court took less than 2 hours to return a verdict of murder, along with convictions for witness intimidation and attempting to shift blame. In December of that same year, Burkitt, then 53 years old, received a life sentence with a minimum term of 20 years. The community reaction focused on the senselessness of the conflict. Hemingway's family described her as someone with a big heart and an irreplaceable presence within a supportive family unit. However, Burkitt remained at HMP New Hall in West Yorkshire until April of 2020, when she died in hospital from COVID-19 pneumonia. She was 55 years old. This case underscores the danger of escalating neighbor disputes, the risks of retaliatory thinking, and the importance of reporting early patterns of aggression before they intensify. It also shows how quickly everyday conflict can turn lethal when weapons are introduced, and why bystanders should always alert authorities when repeated confrontations begin to cross safe boundaries. Unchecked hostility can take years to build, but only seconds to destroy lives. Peaceful intervention remains the most protective choice. Second offender, Teresa Hanson, 54 years old. December the 28th, 2022, West Cowick, East Yorkshire. A quiet December evening meant for preparing dinner instead became the turning point in a long and complicated marriage. Teresa Hanson was a 54-year-old former hairdresser living in West Cowick, East Yorkshire. She and her husband, Paul Hanson, were childhood sweethearts who had been married for more than 3 decades and shared 2 children. Their relationship, however, had become strained by Paul's long-term drinking, the verbal abuse that accompanied it, and the effects of a head injury he suffered in 2012. On the afternoon of the incident, the couple were at home preparing their evening meal. Teresa was chopping onions with a kitchen knife when Paul, who had been drinking, began arguing with her over the food she was preparing. He told her to throw his meal into the bin and continued verbally abusing her. According to Teresa, she turned toward him and pushed him away while still holding the knife. She later claimed that Paul walked toward her at the same moment, causing the blade to enter his chest. The knife entered his body at a height of 129 centimeters above the ground. Teresa stated she did not immediately realize what had happened. She heard the dog barking, saw a trail of blood, and found Paul collapsed. She called 999 and told the operator she had unintentionally stabbed him in a moment of anger. Paramedics arrived to find Paul critically injured, and Teresa pleaded with them, offering £1,000 each if they could save him. Despite efforts, Paul died from the single stab wound. Police attended the scene and arrested Teresa that same day. During her initial interviews, she stated she had stabbed Paul out of anger. Later, she claimed he had walked onto a weakly held knife. A Home Office pathologist examined the injuries and said this explanation was highly unlikely. The investigation established a pattern of verbal and emotional abuse from Paul, along with his heavy drinking, but found no evidence of pre-planning by Teresa. The case proceeded to trial. The first jury was unable to reach a verdict. A second trial began at Hull Crown Court, where Teresa again denied murder. The prosecution argued that the stabbing was a spontaneous act of violence and that she intended to cause really serious harm. The defense maintained that the stabbing was accidental. After hearing evidence, the jury found Teresa guilty of murder on September 21, 2023. On October 3, 2023, she was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 9 years. The judge accepted that she had not intended to kill Paul and that she had faced significant provocation linked to his drinking and verbal abuse. Paul's children, Ryan and Sheree, publicly supported their mother. They described their father's death as an accident, affirmed their belief in Teresa's account, and spoke of deep loss within the family unit. Sometimes a single moment can alter a lifetime, reminding us how fragile even long-standing relationships can be when conflict goes unresolved. Third offender, Sheree Spencer, 45 years old. January 1, 2016, Burkitt, East Yorkshire. A calm village home can conceal years of turmoil, and sometimes the truth only emerges when someone finds the strength to reveal it. Sheree Spencer was a 45-year-old woman living in East Yorkshire when her crimes entered the public domain. She and her husband, Richard Spencer, had been together since the year 2000 and married in Thailand in 2009. They shared 3 young children and were living in Burkitt, near Selby, during the years in which the coercive and controlling behavior occurred. Ironically, Sheree held a senior role within the Ministry of Justice, working on a project examining the impact of custodial sentences on families. Richard later described her as confident, sociable, and well-liked when they first met. Over time, however, their marriage became defined by escalating violence, intimidation, and humiliation. Between January 2016 and June 2021, Sheree subjected Richard to a long and sustained pattern of abuse. The behavior began with pushing, breaking objects, and occasional slaps, followed by apologies. Gradually, the violence intensified. She punched, kicked, and slapped him persistently. In one incident, she struck him on the back of the head with a wine glass, requiring stitches. In another, she hit him with a wine bottle, causing a permanently disfigured cauliflower ear and a chipped elbow. She spat at him, grabbed him by the throat, and once lunged with a kitchen knife, leaving a 2-centimeter cut below his knee. Many of the incidents happened when she had been drinking heavily, sometimes consuming as many as 3 bottles of wine a day. Her control extended beyond physical assault. She dictated where Richard could sleep, which toilet he could use, and damaged his belongings, including laptops, phones, clothing, and even a tire on his car. She regularly shouted degrading insults and threatened to make false allegations to prevent him from reporting the abuse. Over time, the couple's home became a place governed by fear rather than stability. Richard eventually began documenting the abuse using nanny cams, originally installed after their first child was born in 2015. He kept the recordings secret, emailing copies to himself and deleting them from his phone. The evidence ultimately consisted of 43 photographs of injuries, 36 video clips, and 9 mobile phone recordings. In 2021, after a friend contacted police on his behalf, officers arrived at the home and arrested Sheree on suspicion of common assault. She appeared intoxicated and showed no surprise during her arrest. During interviews, she attempted to portray herself as the victim, but that claim was disproven when officers reviewed the footage. One officer reportedly broke down in tears while watching the material. The case proceeded to Hull Crown Court, where Sheree pleaded guilty to coercive and controlling behavior and to 3 counts of assault causing actual bodily harm. Judge Kate Rayfield described it as the worst case of controlling and coercive behavior she had encountered. In early 2023, Sheree was sentenced to 4 years in prison. As she was led away from court, Sheree grinned. Richard stated he was slowly rebuilding his life, though he acknowledged full recovery may never be possible. He shared his story publicly to raise awareness of male victims of domestic abuse. Even behind closed doors, harm can endure for years, reminding us how deeply silence can conceal suffering until the truth finally comes to light. 4th offender, Paige Cook, 22 years old. October the 19th, 2019, Howden, East Yorkshire. Some relationships fracture quietly, but others unravel through violence, manipulation, and fear, leaving behind scars that never fully fade. Paige Cook, 22 years old, at the time of her conviction, lived in Howden. Outwardly, she came from what the court described as a very good and supportive family, but behind closed doors, she subjected her partner, 10 years her senior, to a prolonged campaign of coercive control, violence, and psychological manipulation. The couple met on Tinder in 2018, and the relationship quickly descended into a horrifying campaign of abuse. The abuse began subtly, with insults and restrictions on clothing and phone use, before escalating into violence. Cook isolated her partner from friends, controlled her finances, and monitored her communications. By 2019, the violence had intensified. During a holiday in Cumbria, Cook stabbed her partner in the knee with a pair of scissors, later claiming she had fallen from a hot tub onto them. Months later, in October of that year, a drunken argument turned into a stabbing. Cook plunged a knife into her partner's arm, an incident heard by neighbors but initially concealed when the victim, still under Cook's psychological control, told police she had self-harmed. Cook deepened her manipulation. She seized the victim's phone, sent messages pretending to be her, and made threats that her life wouldn't be worth living if she reported the truth. She attended the police station with the victim after the October stabbing, attempting to reinforce the cover story. Only in January 2020 did the victim, exhausted and traumatized, finally contact the police, saying she was ready to disclose what had really happened. As the investigation unfolded, Cook's behavior grew more calculated. While in custody for breaching a domestic violence protection order, she called the victim 22 times in a single day. She professed love, promised marriage, and told her they could start again. But a letter uncovered by investigators revealed Cook mocking the victim to another inmate. "She thinks we're engaged, lol lol lol, hilarious." This letter dismantled any lingering doubt about Cook's intentions and confirmed the manipulation underpinning the entire relationship. Humberside police pieced together the evidence: testimony from friends detailing the victim's isolation and job loss, medical records illustrating multiple stab wounds, and Cook's documented attempts to pervert the course of justice. The investigation led Cook to plead guilty to wounding with intent, wounding, assault, occasioning actual bodily harm, coercive and controlling behavior, and acts intended to pervert the course of justice. In December 2020, at Hull Crown Court, Paige Cook was sentenced to 8 years in prison and handed a 10-year restraining order. The court emphasized the profound psychological harm inflicted. The victim suffered depression and post-traumatic stress disorder and remained scarred both physically and emotionally. Friends and an ex-partner testified that Cook had previously shown similar violent patterns. One ex had even warned police years earlier, "Lock her up because she will really hurt someone soon." The case drew public attention as another stark reminder of coercive control's hidden dangers, and police used the outcome to underline their commitment to supporting victims, regardless of gender. Cruelty carried out in private can last for years, but one moment of courage can finally bring the truth into the light. 5th offender, Janina Milieskiene, 42 years old. June the 13th, 2018, Arthur Street, Hull. Some crimes begin with a single call for help, yet end with consequences far darker than anyone involved could foresee. Janina Milieskiene, a 42-year-old Lithuanian shop worker living in Hull, she lived on Arthur Street with her partner, 52-year-old Rolandas Poskus. Their relationship, according to her testimony, had long been marred by alcohol-fueled arguments and threats. What unfolded in the early hours of that June morning would lead to one of Hull's most disturbing cases of domestic homicide and concealment. According to Milieskiene, Mr. Poskis had been heavily drunk, aggressive, and threatening her with a knife shortly before the violence. Frightened, she phoned her son, 24-year-old Mantas Punzius, asking him to come to the house. When he arrived, he launched a savage assault on Mr. Poskis, who was allegedly asleep in bed. The attack continued as Punzius threw him down the stairs and inflicted further blows. The injuries were catastrophic. 27 fractured ribs, some piercing his lungs, severe head wounds, and extensive trauma to internal organs. After the attack, Punzius placed Mr. Poskis's semi-naked body into the boot of a car. Milieskiene claimed she did not witness this. What she undoubtedly did next, however, formed the basis of her conviction. She extensively cleaned the property, told neighbors and acquaintances that Mr. Poskis had moved to London, and denied knowing anything about his disappearance. Meanwhile, Punzius abandoned the body on waste ground near Dane Park Road. 2 days later, on June 15, 2018, dog walkers discovered the body in undergrowth. A murder investigation began immediately. Forensic examiners found the house saturated with evidence of a violent assault, contradicting Milieskine's account. She was arrested 3 weeks after the killing and consistently denied assisting her son, responding, "I don't know," when confronted with the extensive blood traces throughout the home. Meanwhile, during the investigation, when detectives discovered the victim's injuries, they described the injuries as some of the worst they had ever seen. At Hull Crown Court, Milieskiene testified through an interpreter, insisting she only called her son because she feared for her life. The jury, however, heard detailed forensic evidence and testimony, establishing the scale of the cleanup, the deception she attempted, and the lies she spread about Poskis leaving town. They unanimously convicted her of assisting an offender. Her son, meanwhile, was found guilty of murder and later sentenced to life imprisonment. In December 2018, Milieskiene received a custodial sentence of 30 months for covering up the crime. The court acknowledged the complexity of the domestic situation but underscored her active role in obscuring what had taken place. Public reaction focused largely on the brutality of the killing itself and the disturbing lengths taken to conceal it. The lack of remorse, repeated deception, and harrowing details revealed in court left a lasting impression on those who followed the case. Sometimes the choices made in moments of fear can shape a future that cannot be undone, leaving truth buried beneath silence and denial. Sixth offender, Sally Godwin, 28 years old. November 9th, 2019, Dodthorpe, Hull. Some tragedies unfold not from a single moment of rage, but from years of fear quietly eroding a person's ability to endure. Sally Godwin, 28 years old at the time of the incident, lived on the Orchard Park estate with her partner, 30-year-old Ronald Ports, and their 2 children. They had been together since their early teens and were described as childhood sweethearts, yet behind closed doors, their 12-year relationship had become corrosive. Godwin had suffered domestic abuse for more than a decade, leaving her hospitalized on previous occasions. She was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, a reflection of the long-term violence she had endured. The events of that November night began with a drunken dispute over missing crack cocaine. Just after midnight, Mr. Ports searched the bathroom cabinet, could not find the drugs, and became aggressive. He attacked Godwin, grabbing her neck and hair, swearing at her, and escalating an argument that their children, aged 12 and 4, could hear from elsewhere in the house. As she tried to pull herself up from the kitchen floor, she knocked over a knife block. She reached for the nearest knife, later saying she grabbed it only because she believed violence was about to worsen. In the chaotic struggle, she stabbed Mr. Ports once in the chest. The wound proved fatal. Realizing what had happened, Godwin and her son ran into the street calling for help. She told a neighbor directly, "I've killed him," and cradled Mr. Ports as he took his final breaths. Emergency services arrived, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. 2 days later, on November the 11th, 2019, Godwin was charged with murder. When she first appeared in court, she wept, begging her family not to let authorities take her children from her. The investigation confirmed the argument had been alcohol-fueled and violent. Witness accounts, medical records of past injuries, and Godwin's own testimony about years of abuse formed a significant part of the Crown's consideration. Prosecutors acknowledged that while the relationship was not entirely one way, Godwin had been the primary victim of long-term domestic violence. A psychological report confirmed her PTSD, and the CPS ultimately accepted her plea of guilty to manslaughter by reason of loss of control in April 2020. Sentencing took place on August 17, 2020, at Sheffield Crown Court. The judge described the killing as a spontaneous act of violence committed during a temporary loss of control, triggered by fear of further assault. She received a 6-year prison sentence. Aggravating features included the presence of the children in the home, who witnessed parts of the incident and its aftermath. Mitigating factors included the decade-long pattern of abuse, her immediate attempt to seek help, and her evident remorse. As she was led away, Godwin sobbed and blew a kiss to her parents. The reaction from the victim's family was emotional. Mr. Ports's mother described him as lovely and said she was heartbroken. Humberside Police expressed hope that the sentence brought some measure of justice for the family, while acknowledging the complexity of the case. When violence becomes part of daily life, a single moment can determine a future no one intended, shaped by fear, desperation, and irreversible consequence. 7th offender, Tanya Stansfield, 27 years old. May the 22nd, 2018, Princes Avenue, Hull. Some crimes last only seconds, yet their impact lingers far longer in the lives they shatter. Tanya Stansfield, 27 years old at the time, lived on Newstead Street, off Chanterlands Avenue in West Hull. Her background was marked by a wretched childhood, in which she was introduced to drugs by those meant to protect her. By adulthood, she struggled with Class A drug addiction, was undergoing methadone treatment, and suffered from long-term depression rooted in her early life. Around 10:40 in the morning, an 82-year-old pensioner approached the ATM outside Sainsbury's on Princes Avenue. She was simply withdrawing £200 on her way to the hairdresser's. Stansfield, loitering nearby with no legitimate purpose, watched the elderly woman complete the withdrawal. As the cash was still in the pensioner's hand, Stansfield approached and asked her for the time, an intentional distraction. She then grabbed the woman's left wrist, applying pressure as the victim desperately tried to hold onto her money. The pensioner even bit into Stansfield's forearm in a frantic attempt to resist. Despite this, Stansfield overpowered her, snatched the £200, and sprinted up Princes Avenue, leaving the shaken woman distressed and trembling. The investigation was swift and evidence-driven. CCTV cameras outside the supermarket captured the robbery, the confrontation, and Stansfield's escape. Once apprehended, she admitted 2 counts of theft. A pre-sentence report prepared by the probation service assessed her background, behavior, and attitude, concluding that she was not genuinely remorseful and had been evasive during interviews. The report also detailed her long-standing addiction and the depressive illnesses she suffered as a result of her childhood neglect, but these did not outweigh the seriousness of the violent robbery. Her exact arrest date was not disclosed publicly, though she was apprehended shortly after the robbery. The court process moved quickly. In June 2018, only weeks after the incident, Stansfield appeared at Hull Crown Court for sentencing. She sobbed in the dock, yet recorder Richard Woolfall criticized the targeted nature of the crime. He emphasized that she had chosen the victim precisely because of her age and vulnerability, knowing she would be no match for her younger attacker. He noted her lack of genuine remorse as an aggravating factor. Stansfield was sentenced to 12 months in prison for the daylight robbery. Community reaction focused heavily on the cruelty of the attack. The 82-year-old victim said she had been left shaky, changed her daily routine, and now felt anxious whenever withdrawing cash. Her fear reflected broader concerns about crimes against vulnerable people. Local coverage described the mugging as horrific, highlighting the need for awareness around opportunistic attacks on the elderly, though there were no widespread protests or notable public campaigns linked specifically to this case. Stansfield served her custodial sentence at a fixed duration, though her precise status after release is not documented. Her story, one shaped by addiction, trauma, and a moment of calculated violence, left a lasting mark on the victim, the community, and the ongoing conversation about protecting those most at risk. A single reckless choice can echo far beyond its moment, leaving damage that no sentence can fully undo. Final offender, Lucy Roberts, 39 years old. October 1st, 2017, Beverley, East Yorkshire. Sometimes the boldest crimes hide in plain sight, carried out quietly by those trusted the most, until one careless photograph reveals everything. Lucy Roberts, 39 years old, was the respected manager of a luxury Daniela Draper jewelry store in Beverley. Colleagues saw her as warm, dependable, and dedicated. What they did not know was that, across 14 months, she was stealing almost £125,000 worth of diamonds, gold, and silver. Her downfall began not with a missing item, but with holiday selfies she proudly sent to former colleagues. Between October 1st, 2017, and December 27th, 2018, Roberts used her position to quietly remove stock from the store. She would take pieces home, under the guise of working on stock, falsify stock, take reports, and carry out fraudulent return transactions to disguise the losses. Suspicion grew among staff as she regularly left the store with items she claimed needed checking. When she eventually resigned and went on a luxury cruise, she relaxed, believing the deception was complete. The illusion fell apart quickly. Her former colleagues, shocked by the unusual jewelry she flaunted in her pictures, alerted the retailer. Internal checks revealed a pattern of missing stock and manipulated paperwork. Daniela Draper Management contacted the police, triggering an extensive investigation. Officers searching Roberts' home found 269 stolen items worth over £107,000, hidden in boxes beneath the bed and in cupboards. When Roberts returned to the UK at Heathrow Airport, officers intercepted her. She was wearing jewelry worth over £1,000 and carrying almost £14,000 worth in her suitcase. Police body-worn footage captured her desperately trying to remove and conceal more items while being escorted. Roberts initially denied wrongdoing but eventually pleaded guilty to theft by an employee. At Grimsby Crown Court, the prosecution highlighted the scale of the breach of trust, noting that she had stolen without a care in the world. The judge sentenced her to 28 months in prison in June 2025. The retailer expressed relief, stating they were pleased to finally have closure after several years, emphasizing the emotional impact on staff who felt deeply betrayed by someone they once considered a friend. The case served as a stark reminder of how long-term deception can flourish behind a facade of trust. And as investigators pieced together Roberts' actions, it became clear how crucial vigilance and verification were in preventing similar internal thefts. With that in mind, 3 key warnings emerge from this case. Trust within a workplace should never replace proper audit systems, regular checks, protect both employees and employers. Sudden changes in behavior, including unexplained spending or secrecy, should prompt closer oversight. High-value roles require clear accountability, with shared controls to prevent any employee from operating unchecked. Greed may glitter for a moment, but the truth inevitably strips the shine away, and the fall that follows is rarely gentle. As we close this case, remember, behind every quiet street and every trusted face, a hidden truth may be waiting to surface. If tonight's story left you questioning what people are truly capable of, there are countless more chilling tales across the UK still to uncover. So don't forget to subscribe to UK Real Crime and hit the notification bell, ensuring you're the first to see the next investigation the moment it drops. Your curiosity shapes this channel, so tell us in the comments which crimes, criminals, or unexplained mysteries you want exposed next. From forgotten files to shocking modern cases, your suggestions might lead to our next deep dive.